Everyone. We're glad that you have rejoined us this morning. This session is entitled The Tyndale Vision, talking a little bit about Tyndale University and the Christian liberal arts tradition. Oftentimes when people come to Tyndale, they've come because they know a little bit about our programming, they've heard about it through alumni, perhaps parents have been here, but they're sometimes a little bit confused, or they simply don't know what the liberal arts means and the core curriculum that we possess here at Tyndale at the undergraduate level. A few years ago, my friend and colleague, Dr. Ben Reynolds, offered to put together a lecture talking about the liberal arts, and it has just been such an important lecture through the years that every year I ask him to reprise it, and he so graciously does so for us. And he not only talks about the liberal arts and how it applies specifically to Tyndale, but significantly he talks a little bit about what you can do as a student here at Tyndale in terms of your own exploration of faith, your journey of learning, and the fullness of what it means to be formed in the image of Christ. Dr. Ben Reynolds is a professor of New Testament here at Tyndale University. He has authored 4 significant scholarly books, and recently, as you may have seen on our website, was inducted into the Society of New Testament Studies, which is a prestigious organization that is internationally renowned. Dr. Reynolds is also the husband of Lizzie Reynolds. Many of you have met Lizzie already, and the dad of 3 wonderful boys that keep him very active playing soccer and hockey and camping and everything else. So Ben, it's so wonderful to have you with us, and you as students will be in for a treat as you listen to Dr. Ben Reynolds.
Thank you, George. It's great to be here. Wherever you guys are, I hope you're, sorry, take this off. Hope you're doing all right. It'd be great to have you here in the room, but you're logging in different places. As George said, I will be talking to you about the liberal arts and some advice for beginning the journey of lifelong learning. That's the title of the talk. There will be some slides here shortly behind me. But as a faculty member here at Tyndale University, it's an honor to have a chance to speak with you at your incoming orientation here to Tyndale. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you about what we are here at Tyndale University. It's interesting that George called it the Tyndale Vision. I never thought that what I was talking about was the Tyndale Vision, but I think he's right on that that's what we're talking about. So I want to cast that vision for you today in a way. What you're going to be learning about in the next few weeks here, if you have not already been aware of it, is that Tyndale University, we deeply care about your education and your formation as human beings created in the image of God. Both of those things. We're not just here to get degrees. As one of your professors, my primary job is being involved on the education side of that education and formation equation. But you should know that we don't view education and formation as 2 separate things. You should consider your classes and your coursework as part of your responsibility as a follower of Jesus to be conformed to his image. You should also consider all aspects of life as part of your education. Because of this full-orbed understanding of learning and faith, Tyndale University is dedicated to Christian education that is centered in the humanities, arts, and sciences. Traditionally, this sort of education has been referred to as a liberal arts education. So, the liberal arts education, before I get into this, I want you to not be too concerned about the fact that Tyndale may have gone liberal. That's not what we're talking about here. Whether theologically or politically, Tyndale has not gone liberal. What I mean by liberal is an ancient meaning of the term. In the liberal arts, the older meaning, this is one that the Economist newspaper just this week has made an extensive argument for, this older meaning of liberal. But but it's going to take me some time to explain this to you. Because one of the things you're also going to discover here at university is that most concepts and ideas cannot be explained in a soundbite or 280 characters or an Instagram story. If anything actually can be explained in that amount of space. So you're going to have to bear with me here in this explanation. Liberal, in its original concept, in its original context, had to do with a contrast between slavery and being free. Liberty and liberal come from the same root words. The idea of liberal has to do with this idea of being free, having the idea of not being one who is enslaved, one who has the space to go about leisurely activity, to have luxury of life. Education originally was only for those who were not slaves, for those who were free. So therefore, the liberal arts is from that background of those who are free to have leisure and luxury to learn. In the, let's see here, see if I can move to my next slide. There we go. The liberal arts in the medieval time period, which grew out of this ancient Greco-Roman context, was made up of two parts, the trivium and the quadrivium. So we're going to talk first about the trivium, and then we'll get into the quadrivium. Tri having to do with 3, quad having to do with 4. So there were 7 liberal arts, which is indicated in this image behind me. The trivium was about the ability to communicate, to debate, and to formulate ideas. The trivium was made up of 3 items: grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. Grammar provided the knowledge of language and how it functions. It was important for students to learn this grammar, how language functions, how can you communicate. Once you had grammar understood, then you moved into dialectic. And dialectic enhanced one's ability to dialogue with others and to defend your views. It's sort of like debating, argumentation. You would use the grammar you learned to form these dialectical arguments. The next part of the trivium is rhetoric. And rhetoric had to do with the ability to speak well. Hopefully you've heard of a rhetorical flourish. So once you understood grammar and language, once you understood dialectic, communication, dialogue, then how can you do that well in a way that's beautiful? So these 3 parts made up the trivium: grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And you had to master the trivium before you could move on to the quadrivium. The quadrivium essentially made up what we would call subjects today. These are mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. That may seem like a strange set of subjects for us today in the modern world: mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. Mathematics had to do with pure counting. Geometry had to do with counting in space. So Greco-Roman oraticians, those learning how to speak and being involved in oratory, being aware of the space on a stage as you moved around and spoke was important. Music is counting in time. And astronomy, paying attention to the stars and the planets, is counting in time and space. Those made up the quadrivium, which could again only be learned once you had mastered the trivium of grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. Our modern equivalent to these subjects, to the quadrivium, is essentially the humanities, arts, sciences, and social sciences, or essentially what subject you choose to major in. That is functioning as the quadrivium. But again, the trivium formed the basics of education and had to be mastered before it was learned. Now, Dorothy Sayers, in a lecture entitled The Lost Tools of Learning, which she gave in Oxford in 1947, makes this point very clearly. If you were here in the room, I'd ask if anybody's heard of Dorothy Sayers before. All right, the 2 people here with me, hands are up. But usually, I find that very few actually know who Dorothy Sayers was. But You may have heard of some of her friends, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien. If Dorothy Sayers had been a man, she probably would have been in the Inklings with the two of them. But it was an all-male club at that time, and so she was not. If you are into mysteries, she has a great series about Lord Peter Wimsey, who solves mysteries. He's a wonderful character. But she was also an important intellectual. She was known for her work on Dante's the Inferno, the Divine Comedy. But she gave this lecture again, The Lost Tools of Learning, in 1947. And she said, "Is not the great defect of our education today that although we often succeed in teaching our pupils subjects, we fail lamentably on the whole in teaching them how to think? They learn everything except the art of learning. It is as though we taught a child mechanically and by rule of thumb to play the harmonious blacksmith upon the piano, but had never taught him the scale or how to read music, so that having memorized the harmonious blacksmith, he still had not the faintest notion how to proceed from that to tackle the last rose of summer." If you're like me and you didn't grow up playing piano, that may not make a whole lot of sense, the example that she gives. But maybe even some of you who didn't know piano would at least be aware of Hot Cross Buns and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Her example here is essentially, if you just memorize how to play Hot Cross Buns on the piano, but don't know anything about notes or reading music, there's no way you're going to be able to play the Birch Canoe. The importance of learning the basics, learning how to learn, is extremely important before you can actually go on to learn other things. You can't just jump from one thing to the next. Her lament, though, of the mid-20th century is not new. Quintilian, in the first century, in his book on oratory, he states that it is impossible to reach the summit in any subject unless we have first passed through all the elementary stages. This is a reminder of patience, that we have to move through step by step. You can't climb to the top of a mountain by just jumping to the top. It takes one step at a time, and we have to work through our education in the same sort of way. The liberal arts that we're learning here at Tyndale, which is part of our curriculum, is important for training students how to learn regardless of what subject you choose to learn. These elementary stages are extremely important. This is true of almost any activity. Take a ballerina or any sort of dancer, for example, right? If any of you have done dance, it takes a lot of practice. You can't just go out and jump around and be dancing. There's training that is involved, right? With ballet, I've never taken ballet, but there are exercises, right? You have to practice to be able to do them, to understand how your body functions. If you're a painter, you have to understand about color and line and perspective. If you're going to be a musician, as we've already seen examples, you have to learn your scales, you have to read notes. To be an athlete, it takes training of ball control, conditioning, to be able to do that. We can go on and on with these examples, but these are all important ways to think about how we initially have to learn the basics before we can become better at what we do, whether that is ballet, whether that is being an excellent musician or an incredible athlete. The trivium in the liberal arts is about the basics of learning. This is what is part of our curriculum, our core curriculum, the sort of courses that everyone has to take at Tyndale functions as that trivium and that basics. A few years ago, the University of Windsor president wrote an article in the Globe and Mail in which he stated, "A degree in the liberal arts, with its focus on the broad spectrum of human endeavor, has never been needed more." He's responding to the emphasis for STEM courses in high schools and universities so that students can essentially walk off an assembly line and be given a job. And his point here is that we really need people who are able to think, not just to be able to do one simple task. Because the world changes and things move, and if you can only do the one task and that task disappears, what are you going to do? But if someone has learned how to learn and can be adaptable and move and think in critical ways, there are other opportunities for you. So this is where I can step on some toes a little bit, at least in light of current thinking with regard to university education. But in my view, university education and formation of the individual is not necessarily practical. In the ancient term, it's leisurely, it's a luxury. But if you approach your education and your daily life as part of your vocation and your service to God, what you are embarking on is of eternal importance. My goal as one of your professors is to give you tools to continue learning in any area, not just in my discipline. With all of today's problems and challenges, we need people who understand our world in an integrated way and can think and articulate their thoughts well. You need to learn how to express your thoughts and ideas articulately, to learn the basics of language and how words are used and function. Integrate, don't compartmentalize. God has created an integrated world. We are body, mind, and soul. The heavens and the earth make up the cosmos. There is unity in diversity and diversity in unity, hence the term university. Which leads me to my next point. Tyndale University is a liberal arts university. We are a university that offers Bachelor of Arts degrees in multiple disciplines. We are a university that requires you to take a breadth of courses outside of your major of study because these are foundational to being a student who knows how to learn. So you may be a psychology student wondering, why am I in English 101? I am a health and human services major. Why am I taking Old Testament scripture? I'm a biblical studies and theology major. Why am I having to take intro to psych or intro to sociology? Because it's important to have this breadth of education so that as you move through, you understand multiple areas of education, curriculum, and the world around us. Tyndale is a university that teaches with Jesus at the center of the disciplines. We believe that God created all things, and therefore that all disciplines and all areas of study ultimately teach us about God and his creation. As Abraham Kuyper is quoted as saying, "There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, 'Mine.'" This is something that we hold to as Tyndale University. All areas of learning, all areas of education belongs to God and to Christ. As your professors, we teach as followers of Jesus how to be faithful followers of Jesus Christ and competent thinkers as you learn about and engage the world. My desire is that you would learn how the Bible and Christian faith inform the great questions in your discipline, and how your discipline also informs your faith. My desire is that you would begin to think as believers and followers of Jesus in this complicated world in which we live. How do we approach such questions as political and religious extremism in our world today? How do we address a distorted understanding of what freedom is? How do we deal with pandemics, with health, with care for others, and government requirements about health? How do we address the role of the West in Afghanistan and the implications for the future of Afghanis and the Taliban? What do we do about the challenge of dictatorial nations as they face in regard to liberal democracy and liberty? How do we address issues of refugees, human trafficking, nuclear proliferation, the national election here in Canada? How do we address science and Christian faith, or philosophy and theology? How do we think about these things? How do we come to answers? As a student here at Tyndale, you should expect to ask these questions and be asked these questions. These are the sorts of questions that you should be wrestling with, that you need to ask, that you need to come to some sort of understanding of. that you should discuss with your fellow students, that you should be expecting of yourselves and your professors, because all areas of education touch on our world, and our world is part of our educational endeavors. You're not going to be handed answers. Students who've been in my classes sometimes will get frustrated because I don't tell them what to think. I want you to learn how to think and come up with arguments and answers to the questions that you have. University is not ultimately about learning things. That can be done anywhere. University is about learning how to learn. It's about the formation of the individual with regard to character and faith. Seneca the Younger, who lived in Rome in the early 1st century, wrote in his moral epistles, "The liberal arts prepare the soul for the reception of virtue." The liberal arts prepare the soul for the reception of virtue. University is ultimately not about getting a job. It's about your vocation. It's about seeking God's calling on one's life and learning in order to better serve God and his people, and about becoming better prepared to be douloi Christou, servants of Christ, which is Tyndale's motto. For us as Christians, Seneca's virtue, it's a laudable goal, but even in the ancient sense of virtue, it's not an end goal for us as believers. Ultimately, the goal of learning and education is the pursuit of God. In his book, Beauty for Truth's Sake, Stratford Caldecott writes, "At the heart of any culture worthy of being called culture is not work, but leisure, schole in the Greek, a word that lies at the root of the English word school. At its highest, leisure is contemplation. It is an activity that is its own justification, the pure expression of what it is to be human. It is what we do. The purpose of the quadrivium was to prepare us to contemplate God in an ordered fashion. Remember, mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. To take delight in the source of all truth, beauty, and goodness, while the purpose of the trivium was to prepare us for the quadrivium. The purpose of the liberal arts is therefore to purify the soul, to discipline the attention so that it becomes capable of devotion to God, that is, to prayer." Caldecott here is saying that the liberal arts essentially is about using our leisure to contemplate God, to do so in an orderly fashion, to purify our souls, to discipline our attentions, to be able to devote ourselves to God. That's what we're about here. This is what is at stake in your university education: the pursuit of God, the formation of character, and the reception of virtue. So, as you enter into classes this week, engage in classroom discussion. Ask tough questions. Integrate what you learn from each of your classes. Integrate these things with your faith, and your faith with your discipline. Learn how to formulate and articulate answers to the questions that you will inevitably face. That, to me, is an education that will continue to benefit you in your life more than any details you remember about the War of Roses, about cost-benefit analysis, Milton's contextual situation, or Piaget's understanding of development. Learn how to learn. That is your challenge. This is a privileged, leisurely opportunity in the ancient sense of liberal, the free sense. Take advantage of this time of leisurely and free learning, that is, liberal learning here in the liberal arts. This is where you are, a Christian liberal arts university, with professors and staff who desire you to make the most of your 4 years in the pursuit not merely of a degree or a career, but in pursuit of an education and learning that will broaden your horizons and aid you in becoming capable of devotion to God. I'm going to shift gears here a bit from this discussion on the liberal arts and begin to give you some some advice for how to navigate this experience. But before I do, I want to highlight something that's going to be upcoming later this month. The Sophia Society, which you will hear about in the coming days more so, is a student organization that's interested in these sorts of issues I've talked about. And they will be hosting a panel discussion on the liberal arts later this month. So pay attention to your Tyndale news feeds about that. But now I want to move to my advice on how do you go about engaging in this educational experience. I'm going to have 3 pieces of advice. The first one is meet someone new. The second one is try something new. And the third one is get to know God better. So, meet someone new. I'm not necessarily talking about anyone in particular who may have caught your eye in these opening days, but I will get to that later. For many of you, this will be the first time that you may have found people like you, people with similar interests in serving God with your lives. For me, it was very much that way at university. You are entering into community life. Even if you're online, there are these communal sorts of aspects that we are involved in. Those of you who are on campus will experience this more so, but we're entering into this world of living together, eating together, learning together, studying, and playing together. This is the place where lifelong friendships can be made, but they don't just fall into your lap. So meet someone new. Some of you may have met new people already, but this isn't something I would encourage you to do every semester that you are here at Tyndale. Make every effort to develop deep and meaningful friendships during the time that you're here. University was an important time for me in developing those friendships. One of my dearest friend is Brian. Whoops, I jumped the wrong way. There we go. Brian's right there in the lower right. That's me right there. I did have hair at one time. So these are, and 4 of our other friends. Brian was a friend. We were never roommates. We didn't really become friends actually until our 3rd year. We did know each other in our first 2 years, but it was during our 3rd and 4th years where we were involved in a number of different things where we became much better friends. We stayed in touch after university. This is in a time period where there were no cell phones. There was no such thing as Facebook unless it was a printed document. So we stayed in touch the old-fashioned way. We were in each other's weddings, and the time when our friendship really solidified even more so was when we both studied in Scotland for our PhDs, where our wives became friends. And we've stayed in touch ever since, attempting to get together with our families at least every other year if we can. This would have been the summer to do that, but it didn't work out. So this is Brian and me and our wives now, and these are our kids who have become friends as well. So what I would encourage you to do is that cultivating these relationships now. Form these deeper foundations of friendship, that will last beyond graduation, that you can stay in touch with one another. With a few warnings, though, beware of cyber online friendships. True community takes place in the shared life. This is a bit of a challenge in our online space, but we can still share life in online ways. But this doesn't often, it's a more of a challenge because of the shared life aspect, but this is where we need to pull together. But what I'm talking about really is not just being friends through Facebook or through other forms of social media. You have to actually have these conversations with your friends to either meet together or have a phone call and actually talk to one another, because we don't really know what's going on in people's lives just from their social media posts, right? I think most of you are aware of that. So put effort as best you can into intentional conversations with friends and building relationships. When it comes to those who you might most be interested in becoming more than friends, I would encourage you to to be careful about doing so. Meeting people new is great, but don't put your effort in this one area. I didn't meet my wife at university, so I would encourage you to sort of be careful in how you engage in this way. The tendency at places like Tyndale to push these early relationships, oh, we met last month and we're getting married this next month, that's not really building a healthy foundation of relationship. There is very little in reality that you can learn about a potential mate just in the context of going to class, writing papers, doing assignments, and being around the university life. It's important to be aware of how people are in other situations and circumstances. The statistics actually show that women who marry later, such as their mid to late 20s, even early 30s, are less likely to divorce. There are important lessons here, and some of you are going to have to learn some of these the hard way. But again, this is the idea about meeting someone new and building these deep foundational friendships is that this area also, the relationships between people who want to grow in a relationship with each other is important to work through these various areas and to be intentional about it. And don't get caught up in the idea of having to have some sort of special someone. All right, that was a bit awkward, but I felt like we needed to talk about it. So, get to know someone new today, tomorrow, and throughout the year. Try something new. Every year, or even every semester, I would encourage you to do something to expand your horizons. Do something you wouldn't normally have done. Get out of your comfort zone. There are many opportunities at Tyndale: activities, athletics, ministries, small groups, student organizations. In the future, think about how you can be involved in student leadership, how you can maybe study abroad for a semester, assuming things open up a little bit more for us. Think about what sort of internships might you want to be involved in. Would you want to get involved in student council? Do you want to be an RA? Do you want to think about getting involved in athletics with the Tyndale Guardians? Are there mission trips or other ministries you'd like to be involved with? Your view of the world and of God becomes bigger through expanding your horizons. There are two specific things for me that stand out during my university time that were part of this expansion of horizons. The first one is what was called Potter's Clay, which was a student-run missions organization that had ongoing relationships with a number of churches in Mexico. And we would go down on a number of weekends during the fall semester, and in the winter semester, again, we would be there for an extended time for the week of Reading Week or spring break, whichever it was. Being involved as a leader of this organization really put me outside my comfort zone, got me into some cross-cultural situations which were really eye-opening and very foundational for me as a human being. And it was very important for building relationships with other students who were also involved in this. Another opportunity was I spent a semester abroad in Europe with a number of students. One of those was my friend Brian, who that photo of that group of friends was actually from that trip when we were in Israel. There are a number of poignant moments from that trip for me, but this image here is one of those. This is from the shore of the Sea of Galilee, looking across from the eastern side of the sea to the western side, across to where Magdal was, where Mary Magdalene most likely was. But to be able to watch a sunset on the Sea of Galilee was an extremely rich time. But when all of us students took this boat trip in the evening when it was dark, we sang worship songs out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and it's dark, and I could look around and see the outline of the hills and realize those are exactly the same hills the disciples and Jesus saw when they were out here. It was an extremely moving experience that I was able to share with these other friends. Another moving experience was being at the concentration camp of Dachau, just outside of Munich, Germany. That was a very moving experience because all of us in their student group, 40 plus, realized how significant it was. And we all sort of went our own ways. and walked in silence. Even when we passed each other, we didn't even speak to each other. We'd sort of look at each other in the eye, and that was about it. These are the sorts of experiences that you can't have in class. We can learn about these and the importance of these places. But to be in the places where history has happened is a very significant opportunity. It's important to try something new and to step out and to do these new things because you don't know how they're going to influence and affect your education and your formation. So try something new. And if you can, try something new as you meet someone new. My next piece of advice, and the last one, is to get to know God better. If you complete your education at this Christian liberal arts university and do not deepen your walk with Jesus, I will be greatly disappointed. Tyndale is a greenhouse for faith. It's easy to fake it, but if you're willing to, you can put down deep roots and grow in your walk and life with Jesus. Your generation faces a lot of issues that previous generations have never faced before. This is why putting down roots are extremely important. You have technology all over the place. What do you do with it? You have masses of information to sort through. You have pornography readily available. You have self-promotion to the world available at your fingertips. In the words of The Economist of February 28th, 2015, teenagers whose time on phones dwarfs that of their elders are developing a social life in which face-to-face and digital forms of contact are used interchangeably and often simultaneously. Manuel Castells of the University of Southern California talks of their phone-based lives playing out in a timeless time, in which activities and exchanges happen in parallel or even backwards. When people's lives come with timelines, it is a common experience to find out what they said first, only after you knew what they said next. That's your reality, and so maybe I'm telling you something you're already sort of aware of. But for those of us who are not part of this generation, who grew up without this, that is very strange. The idea that you would see things in timeless time, that things are backwards and forwards. If you think about how many text conversations you're having simultaneously, social media interactions, like how are you able to do that and focus? This is what I'm talking about. You face challenges that many generations before you have never faced. We may have more information, and we may be accessing it in technologically savvy ways. But what information are we accessing and reading? Judging by the most popular articles on many news sites, the majority of people seem to be spending their time reading what they could read while they're waiting in line at the grocery store. We are most interested in tabloid, trashy sort of things, even though we have all this technological awareness. Most of that stuff is just a complete waste of time and is none of our business. Who married who and who's having a baby and whatever else in the celebrity world. We could be spending a lot more time working on our education and formation and becoming more like Jesus. Phones and social media are designed to distract us. That is their main object. They're trying to keep you on as long as possible. If you think about what am I giving up doing, spending time with friends, reading my coursework, learning and reading more about Jesus, what are you giving up? So what is your generation to do? Some of this is a little bit older, but I think it still applies. Maclean's magazine, some years ago now, called your generation the broken generation, or your iGen, Gen Z. The iGen book, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. What are you to do? There are no longer prizes for showing up. You're expected to show up. You're expected to come to class. You're expected to turn in assignments. And just because you turn in an assignment doesn't mean you're going to get an A. There's a good chance your initial efforts here at university are not going to be the best efforts I've ever seen before on a paper. All right? So this is going to take some work and some learning, but you can do it. It's not impossible. Just expect a challenge. Expect that don't give up when you can't jump to the top of the mountain. You're just going to have to take the one step at a time. This is ultimately not about you. It's about God forming you to be more like him. In other words, this, your life, your vocation, this is about God, just as all creation is about God. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Psalm 8:3-4, when I consider your heavens and the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what are mere mortals that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? Recognize the challenges that there are in the world, that you face as an individual. Seek God and his calling for you. This involves getting to know God better and putting down those roots deep into the soil. There are plenty of opportunities here at Tyndale. Small groups, Bible studies, student groups. There's chapel. There are house groups, your house leaders getting involved in your houses. You should also be involved in a local church. Attending chapel is not church. Get to know some of the people in your church, especially those who are not in your own age group. Being consistent in your walk with God is not easy. There are times in your life where it's a challenge. I've had numerous times, and I feel like I'm still in that. The pandemic has disrupted a number of things. And how do we find that space to be consistent in our walk with God? Reading scripture for class is not the same thing as doing it devotionally. For those of you who will be biblical studies and theology majors, we'll probably have to talk about this again. But continue to be faithful to God and seek him. You don't have to find spiritual golden nuggets every time you spend time with God. You're not going to. In the 16th century, St. Francis de Sales said that prayer and devotion are about making an appearance before God, whether he speaks to us or not. Making an appearance before God, recognizing who he is and who we are as human beings. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship, says, it is not necessary that we should discover new ideas in our meditation. Often this only diverts us and feeds our vanity. It is sufficient if the word, as we read and understand it, penetrates and dwells within us. Just show up for time with God. Put those roots down deep. You are embarking on a liberal arts journey at a Christian university to gain tools for a lifetime of learning. The end goal is not learning things, but learning to learn in order to, quote Stratford Caldecott, to purify the soul, to discipline the attention so that it becomes capable of devotion to God. That is prayer. Learn to learn and love to learn. Look for links between your courses and your class readings. Ask why there are links. Formulate answers. Test them. Test them in discussion and in debate with your friends, the people you're meeting who are new. Do it outside of class, in class. Revise your answers and begin again. As you enter this journey, meet someone new, try something new, and get to know God better. Thanks. See you in class.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reynolds. Every year that I hear this address, I am both inspired. I wish I were 18 years old again to begin my journey here at Tyndale University. And I know that for Dr. Reynolds and for many other people here at Tyndale University, what he has just said has shaped our experience. I myself went to a Christian liberal arts university in upstate New York, and it was there that I discovered the love of learning that would set me on the course of exploration that ended up coming to a place like Tyndale University. And it's really why we do what we do, because we want to share with you the same thing that has been embedded within us through those years of growth. Dr. Reynolds talked about establishing those roots, and that's actually why we call orientation at Tyndale Cultivate, because we recognize that this is the first step of cultivating your life in Christ, the fullness of who you are, the fullness of how you're going to grow into the people that Christ is calling you into, through the nurturing of what is planted even now through these first few days, to the full growth of maturation when you cross this stage 4 years from now, and as you continue your journey into adulthood. So we're glad that you've been with us through this morning. We're going to take a break now for about 45 minutes. So we'd like you to come back onto live stream again at 12:30, when you will meet Dr. Beth Green and Dr. Barry Smith again, to hear a little bit about Tyndale academics, Tyndale University undergraduate studies academics, and then we'll move into Zoom rooms from that point. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you again soon.